Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3's Black Ice. And of course, we're playing as America. We are here. We're ready to push into Palestine here. Next episode, Gamer takes Africa and Crete. Well, we hope we've got to get supplies. Okay, Arno, because right now if I land in Crete, I'm going to land in Crete and we're going to starve because there's no way I can get supplies to Crete. So we have to get a supply path, and either I have to conquer, so I have to defeat whatever forces there are in Gibraltar. And we saw how hard that can be. So that's going to be a major invasion. So I don't know where I'm getting the troops from, Arna. So either I got to pull troops all the way back to, here and do an invasion there, pull most of these forces out, give up all this territory because Italy's going to push my ass, or I've got to somehow magically create troops. I know you're both for your entertainment, and it would make a good episode of invading, but I really just don't have the troops to be able to come in here and hold Gibraltar. So either I have to take Gibraltar or we have to take Suez. Those are the two options to be able to do any naval invasions into any islands or the mainland of Europe in the Mediterranean. So we've got to take Suez first. That is required. Okay, so we're going to send this armored division down like that. This mechanized division about like that. This division to push in against the militia and whatever else is there. This sort of light armor unit there. And let's do that over there. Yeah, well, not just Alexandria, we have to get control of the Suez so that both I and Britain can run convoys around Africa into the Mediterranean, and then we can push on from there. That is a requirement for advancing. Not just I would like to have. Oh, the air's out at sea. Some liners. Okay, well. I guess we'll move out and intervene in that operation. Supplies. Supplies. Getting ambushed out at sea because, of course, you want to fly out at sea because you don't understand the idea of, hey, let's not go to near enemy territory. Yes, you can build that. There, I don't know. Sun Temple pilot. What happened with Gibraltar is Britain was holding it just nicely, and Spain comes into the war, and then I think it was more Canadian, but Commonwealth forces kept invading places like Cadiz, or over here at Malanga or wherever, and they would get ashore because it would be pretty easy to do so. And then Britain would sort of burst out and sort of control this sort of little bit of area briefly, and then Spanish forces would come in and hammer them back into Gibraltar, and cut off and either shatter and force forces back to Britain, because we can see a lot of various forces that were probably, we can hover over some of them and see were sort of remnants from some of that, as well as just outright destroying a bunch of these forces. but also Britain, once it sort of, expanded out a little bit more, would abandon Gibraltar and put their forces, in these other provinces to get hammered down, to be both in organization and in strength. So once they finally retreated back to Gibraltar, they were never in good shape, and Spain just kept up the attacks and kept up the attacks. And eventually these near shattered forces eventually shattered. Instead of just sticking a stack here and saying, fine, and hold into this level 10, I think that's what it is like a level 10 fortress that would have otherwise been doing it. So are you going to have to control Ethiopia? No, fortunately, you can get supplies through here without controlling Ethiopia. I don't know how, because Ethiopia, yes, can be supplied through here now, but they've had supply. I don't know. I think there's some sort of, for all the fucking problems that I've had with, oh my god, and I like him. I'm just upset. Well, it's the game, play the game. Well, I can't imagine if that they're not giving the AIs special supply boosts in Ethiopia. I just can't imagine it. Because for so long, Britain had Gibraltar, which means there's no Italian supplies leaving through to the mouth of the Med, and they had Egypt, and Italy was able to expand because it had enough supplies down here. So I don't buy that this is the game. And I sent in a big force, a fairly big force. Basically, some of this up here is remnants of that force. Guess we can move into here and here. Into Africa down here. Forget up north or south or wherever. But Britain couldn't supply them, even though at the time they were still holding up here in Mombasa. Just because Britain had run out of convoys to get supplies to Africa. Yeah, at the time, Britain still controlled all of these two things, and somehow Italy had plenty of supplies in Ethiopia, plenty of supplies, but Britain had no supplies here and here. So I had to withdraw my forces because they were immediately out of supply. And then Saudi Arabia had come in the war, and Britain was collapsing, so I helped stabilize Saudi Arabia because they had supplies. So yeah, I don't know how they're justifying that this is still going. And for a while, Britain even lost Dar es Salaam, and it was I who retook Port Sudan for them and then left because, hey, I thought they had it under control. But yeah, so yeah. Now, of course, Portugal is an enemy territory. South Africa looks like it's slowly closing it down. And this does look like South Africa. Yeah, South Africa is closing down much. I mean, this is British controlled up here. This is South African controlled. Portugal. So, yeah, it's, craziness. So, yeah. Build those guys. Let's see if we can get across the way here. Okay, well, you know what we should just do? Like, they're going to keep popping out. They're going to be, oh, hey, yeah, you're almost across the way there. Let's well, that's a Saratoga. Okay, that's good. We're going to do another naval invasion, so you guys just come up and base up here. We'll go straight into Tinian. What are we? Okay, they're bombing us with some carrier base whatnots. Okay, well, I don't know if those are, because Marus are supposedly transports. That's, I think, an actual carrier. Because some of these just use, I think, the Mitsubishi Maru. Maybe those are Jeep carriers. I don't know. We lost a DD in that, but we got a CBL. Ah, okay, a battleship. Two battleships, actually, and a coastal battleship. Right, well, just keep bombing that. Armor plating has advanced for aircraft. I think that is for aircraft. The, yeah, heavy fighter cast, right. Okay. Yeah, 47. I'm gonna look for things that we've actually produced a fair number of. Well, yeah, armament. Yeah, this would be good. Let's improve here. Let's invade, yay. Machine gun focus advance. That is here, and we're going to shift that over to here. And CAG pilot. Alright, let's do ground. Okay, well that, taking that out, even though the Saratoga isn't the best shape, let's just move that up there because these guys are going to have to come out of the port here soon. And these guys might get up in time for the battle for that. Hopefully their CAGs will be the going after some Japanese submarines. Okay, they lost 2 submarines. Good. Mountain unit training, very nice, very nice. No, yeah, yeah, we'll let that continue. Don't know how many mountain units I have right now, but still. Okay, like we're pushing in here. Let's, oh, you guys, cavalry charge. Oh shit, we're being overrun down here. Okay, holding there. Let's strategically redeploy it there. This guy's gonna arrive. Please hold there. Guys have got to go out to sea soon. We lost a destroyer. We won the battle in Tel Aviv. So right now, my thoughts are to purely to try to hold somewhere over in here. Those guys can get to there. That'll give us a bit. These guys would always fall back into there. We're good. Okay. Okay, they're still pushing on these guys. These guys are pushing here. These guys are racing into there. These guys. Yeah, that's everybody. We've been doing something there. Yep. Okay. Good. Okay. Good. We got to here, even though we may not be in very good shape. Um. Okay, naval bomber prototype. That should be grayed out. Yeah. Let's shift that to there. Okay, so out in the Pacific, we got the battleship Suwo, two torpedo boats, and a light cruiser in that escaped from, or that was trying to escape from here, but looks like maybe more is coming out here. Or they've just, oh no, there it looks like in action maybe. Ah, there we are. Okay. Hopefully, okay, well they, yeah, okay, two CVLs. I don't know why they're called Marus. Marus are, I thought were transport, you know, like freighters. Just standard freighters. Okay, well, everybody, let's come down this way. Put it together. We don't know what's in this stack here, but hopefully we'll kill it. Like, whatever. Oh, two submarines were lost. They're left. Okay, well, still not completely back from where we were. Gotten chewed up by the Japanese earlier and lost a bunch of battleships, but we are making some headway there. Okay, so these guys are coming down here, these guys are coming to here, and then from here, head over to here. Export a tungsten with who? Canada, yeah, I guess so. Combined arms integration. That one of these. That one. Here. Okay, yeah, we'll do that, I guess. Continue that. These guys, great. Come down this way. Oh, yes, you wanted to know. Okay, yes, Arno, you wanted to see earlier, and I know I said after talking. Are there land-based anti-ships at Tinian? Um, yeah. What? Okay. Well, no. We could probably. Okay. Here we have 10 units. What we need to do is shift one of these down to Tinian to not overstack. But thank you. Give them money for fuel. How much money we? Yeah, we have money coming in. We can pay for that fuel. Okay. Let's take a look. Well, okay. No, we want to come to production here. For our carrier air groups, they're sort of the Corsair, TBMs. What's that? The Seamew? I don't know. Bombers, we are B-17s, flying boats. The Martin PBM-4. The Martin Mariner is a good, very big flying boat. I still like the PBY better, partially because although these are useful to have, I'm not trying to make it so that they're not. The PBYs just seem to be more flexible. Less eggs in one basket, if you will. That can carry. None of these aircraft are very good bombers, because just by their design, part of it is they can't really have very effective belly guns because it's a flying boat element, and so they're never going to be great. Let's bomb a fleet kind of aircraft. However good heavy bombers might be at bombing fleets, these guys aren't going to be terribly good. What they're going to be good at is like going after submarines and other light, naval vessels. But this just seems to be too many eggs in one basket, where the PBY it actually does have greater, I believe. I'm not sure, but I think it generally has greater endurance. I know the longest timed commercial flights, I believe, were these pre-modern jet age were PBYs during World War II, special flight. But so I like them, but I actually like the PBYs better. Okay, now these guys, the Grumman Guardian, I don't really know much about them. That looks like a post-war design, but don't know. Medium bombers. Why is this locked? Okay, now let's go back to here. Okay, B-25 Mitchells for the mediums. Something I don't recognize there for the close air support. The B-26 Invader, the Douglas aircraft, they're okay. We have the P-43 Lancer. I don't know much about that at all. The P-38 Lightning we were talking about last episode for the American long range gliders. Yeah, interceptors. The Mustang here, and transport. The C-47 is what the British called it. The Americans DC-3. Well, maybe that was also the Army Air Corps called it C-47. I don't know. But really good aircraft. Really good. Probably the best. Not the biggest, not that hauls the most, but probably the best transport of the war for ruggedness, for payload. They did have the DC-4s with 4 engines. Same airframe, just bigger wings that could hold 2 more engines, 1 per wing more during the war. But for if you're balancing everything out, survivability, being tough transports, carrying enough supplies to make it a fairly heavy transport, capable of being rather long range, all of those sort of metrics, I would say that this is the best of it. SBDs carried as much as a B-17 could deliver. Yes. Some of the naval bombers were pretty good. I like the TBF or TBM, depending on who's making it. Same aircraft. The Navy just changes the name depending on the manufacturer. I like that as a carrier-based bomber because it's flexible. That's what I like about it, and I think it has the same engine. I think it's the same engine that's in the P-47 Thunderbolt. If I'm getting the Thunderbolt, I think it has the same engine in it, but it's a 3-man aircraft instead of a single fighter. It has your main pilot up front, and then it has a guy that can move from being in a position, and then it has sort of a ball turret in the dorsal position in the back to defend itself, and then it has a guy that can move from in between the pilot and the the ball turret from being there to go down into the belly of the aircraft. And he does have a rear machine gun that's sort of, a ventral machine gun that has very limited fire arc, but it's out of the rear. But it's the one sort of fire arc that the ball turret is radically not able to do. Because I know you can't see my hand here, but you can imagine the ball turret, can't shoot directly behind because the tail fin's there, but mostly behind, and it can sort of shoot down to either side. But if you got an enemy coming at sort of an odd angle, he can easily tell the pilot to pitch, to the right or to the left a little bit, down to give fire angles on stuff coming up there. But coming up right from below and behind it, they couldn't get there with that. So just instead of a 50 that they have up in the main one, they have a 30 cal covering that there. And the guy could go down and do that, operate that sort of on his knees and shooting out the back. Now towards the later part of the Pacific War, they were getting rid of that machine gun just because of a bunch of weight, and they were winning the air war so well that mostly the fighters were able to keep off the American fighters were able to keep off the Japanese interceptors well enough that wasn't that major of a thing. But down in the bomb bay, they could carry a single torpedo that they eventually figure out how to get it right with some additives, and so it becomes a reasonably good torpedo to finish out the war with. So they could do a torpedo, they could put in bombs. Sort of standard was a bomb rack that held 4, but you could put in one big bomb or 2 big bombs or whatever. But you could, and so either you could have the pilot up front in the pilot position, command, to getting ready to drop those bombs, or that guy that can sort of is the radio operator, navigator, jack of all trades guy that can sort of sit up in the middle between the. Let me come back and pull up. I don't know the picture here. Tag. Here, okay, so you have the ball rear turret here. You have the pilot up here. You have that little windows and able to shoot right down here. This guy that sort of sits in between them and here, he can climb down into here or climb up into there. But when he's down in here, he can sit in his seat. And when you open the bomb bay down here, he can sight for bombing. He can sight and not have to worry about the pilot sighting. And they even have provision, though I think they were rarely, if ever, actually in combat, put in there. You can actually there's a provision to mount a Norton bomb sight in here. And so whether you're using the Norton bomb sight or some other bomb sight, and he's sort of looking, his various bomb aiming devices look through the open doors of the bomber. So I think when it's mostly operating as a torpedo bomber, the pilot is doing the bombing. I think a lot of times the other guy is taking over and setting up the bombing from down inside the aircraft and looking out. So it's a really flexible. It's not going to, be a good fighter versus Zeros or whatever, but it's rather maneuverable for a bomber, and so it can carry 2,000 pounds of bombs. So 4 500-pound bombs is sort of its standard loadout. So that's a pretty good loadout, even for going after, port targets and whatnot. Now let's go here. Armor. We're still at the Pershing, the M5 Stuart. Now for the infantry, we already have the sort of a special event for America to get the M1 Garand. So we're using M1 Garands for our infantry, even though it's not specifically showing that. Heavy armor, yeah. So that's sort of where we're at, Arno. The more I look into some of the stuff, the more impressed I am at what America is able to do in the midst of the war in comparison to what I'm used to seeing from Germany and whatnot. Okay, well, this island is unimportant. I think we can go from here to here if we wish to, but that's unimportant. There's no air base, no naval base, no ability to supply. I don't. don't know where we should go next. We're really not strong enough to go in and clear out down here. I don't know if we should go back for some of these islands here. I don't know if we should try the old... Now, Iwo Jima. Now, realize once they got Saipan and Guam here, to be able to bomb Germany, I mean, not Japan, I don't know if our bombers would be able to reach from here to there. Well, let's... Yeah. So... I don't know whether we're just still because we're flying the B-17s that don't have the range, or it's the map or whatever. So maybe we should see about taking some of these islands. This does have an airbase, this doesn't. Yeah, to build a bomb Japan, I don't know. Or maybe we should try to come around down here to try to take out some of these guys down here. I don't. Like I say, we are pathetically weak for America. Yeah, partially I'll accept my bad play, partially because I think they changed things too much. It's a mix. I'll make the video, still haven't made the video yet, but with me bitching and moaning about some of these things. You guys like to hear me bitch and moan, don't you? Hit them where they're weak. Yeah, that's true. Very true. Okay, we lost a bunch of long-range submarines out here to a carrier and a light carrier and a couple of carrier air groups, it looks like. So yeah, they hit pretty hard. Fighter bomber prototype advance. Fighter bomber type, that is here. Okay, we'll let that continue. Class, okay. Need a boat. Any of these invasion forces? I don't think so. Okay, you guys. Naval strike in the area here. Oh, they're going after some destroyers already. Okay. Okay, we don't need to be naval strike. I don't know why my air intercept. You should be air intercepting out here. You know, you can naval, but I'd rather have you air intercept. Destroyers. Okay, formation of the 10th Army, certainly. Navy asks for money, alright. Again, I think these things suck. New battle commander, yeah, cool. Monumental building for the nation, let's see the plans. The Oklahoma was lost a while ago, yes. Motorized, yes, we want the upgrade. Advanced education advancement, advance. Okay, yes. Okay, we have a bunch of buildings. What building do we want to build next? We could build. Okay. We have, okay, those are all major industries. We have Fear National Police building. We have major movie studio. We have Imperial Seat of Government. We have Imperial War Ministry. we have Imperial University here, basically. Okay, so we could do Central Intelligence Headquarters, Palace of the Party, Palace of Justice, so that reduces ruling party support, Imperial Foreign Ministry, or Imperial Finance Ministry. Well, we don't need more money. I mean, yeah, but not really. Okay, for political power, okay, Democratic Party, social liberalism. Right, okay, so we have a lot of popularity, so that isn't a major factor at the moment. Meaning if we go for Palace of Justice, but I don't know that we need either more money or down on the revolt risk. Research efficiency, counter-espionage, or counter-espionage ruling party support. I think Imperial Foreign Ministry is the best building to go for. So let's do that. I hate the way they change the names between Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay. Build this, money, 1,000, yeah, we can afford the 1,000. Descent, yeah, okay, whatever. We'll go for that. Okay, are they doing a mod for Hoi 4? Okay, there's a different team doing the Black Ice mod for Hoi 4. Not the same people that do. It's the same name, both started by the same guy. He, well, not necessarily, well, the guy that was leading the Black Ice team leaves Black Ice over to Oh My God to start working on for Hearts of Iron 3, start working on Hearts of Iron 4, gets fed up with Hearts of Iron 4, has internet problems and other things, and never returns back to Hearts of Iron 3, doesn't continue with Hearts of Iron 4 modding. So a new team takes over where he left off on Hearts of Iron 4. Let's see, does the game allow the U.S. Navy to use its famous recently declassified floating dry docks port level 4 only Bremerton could do more, as well as refueling only the U.S. had the ability. No, I don't think so. Well, okay, I don't think the floating dry docks, I do know about those. They do have the it had huge floating dry docks, at least one out in the Pacific, at least one. And like you say, they were rather secret. What it does have here, and these are some of what they've added. And this was, I'm not sure the version, and sometimes I get chided by, oh my God, well, this has been in the game for 2 years, gamer. Yeah, I know, because it takes me a year or more because I'm only playing on Sundays because I sort of play with you guys to play this game. And so I'm playing it 4 hours a week or whatever, and yeah, it takes me 2 years to get through a game, so you may have gone through two or three major versions of Black Ice before I catch up to it. So it's new to me, even though it may be old to people who are constantly playing it. But they've created some, I would say, nice technologies that show up specialties of nation. Alpini troops here, I presume, for Italy, though it's fairly close. The Japanese long lance torpedo here, or what we call the long lance. The Tiger now. Assault rifles. Charbie one for France. Mosquito for Britain, RP-3 rockets, those are for British ground attack. The Churchill Crocodile, which is now in War Thunder, flamethrower tank. PPSH for the Soviets, Katyusha for the Soviets, D-34, is to give them special bonuses. So the M1 Garand does, and so instead of just having some of the which at first I disagreed with them removing. I was going, hey, we should have it back. An assault rifle thing, just generally for semi-auto rifles because they do make so much of a difference. They've moved it to this. Now the problem with this is and now that we have it, I don't. Okay, Germany comes up with a semi-auto rifle, the Gewehr 43. I mean, they do some earlier Gewehrs, but it's almost as nice as the M1 Garand. In some ways, a little better. Meaning it has a detachable box magazine. It's 10 rounds. 10 versus 8. Yeah, okay, 10 is better than 8, but it's not that big of a difference. It's sort of the detachable box magazine. The Germans get, well, I believe over 100,000, but maybe well over that. I don't know of the Gewehr 43s that are produced. They're mostly on the front, on the Eastern Front. So they've got a lot of them, but it's not but I will agree that it is not a universal replacement for bolt action rifles. Where still up until the end, the main German infantry rifle or infantry, single person carry weapon is still the Kar 98K. Yes, they've got the MP40s. Yes, they have the Sturmgewehr, which is another really cool weapon, and I guess that's what we're seeing here. Though I don't know how to have assault rifle tech active. And I would argue potentially the M1 carbine is almost here. It is not full auto, but it is. There's almost as many, looking at some of the orders of battle, there's almost as many M1 carbines used as M1 Garands by most U.S. fighting formations. But it's sort of like the guys that get the M1 carbines are the guys that are handling the anti-tank gun for the infantry battalion or the mortars for the infantry battalion or whatever else. So it's really not used as an assault weapon, but it's close. So yeah, M1 Garand sort of specialty. That is maybe okay specialty for Germany. So I could live with that. If Germany gets this sometime, but I could argue for even before 44. I could argue in 43. That they could activate this if they wanted to. So I might change that if I get in here and do this. The mulberry ports, yeah. No, the mulberry ports are very important, but they're not. They're a one and done, and they're only used at D-Day, and they don't build any extras. Could they have built more? Yes. But they can't build an endless amount of them, so it's hard to do it in the game. I think it's best... I don't know. It's hard to do that in the game. Where you have the U.S. ability to refueling and resupply at sea. The U.S. become the greatest naval power during World War II, and are still the greatest naval power on the planet. Britain, who was the greatest naval power, is actually, if you look at it, is a short-legged navy, in that it doesn't go to sea for very long, because they have ports everywhere. So they go to sea and then come back to port. Go to sea, come back to port. It's normally less than 30 days that they're out at sea. Where the Americans will go out for months and months and get refueled, resupplied with food, and be kept at sea for a long time. That Britain has a serious difficulty once it wants to come into operations in the Pacific because the Navy is more or less done at some, by D-Day, the big ships in the Navy are more or less done because they don't really want to send an aircraft carrier out in the middle of the North Sea. They're not going to be invading any other places. So what are you going to do with an aircraft carrier? You're controlling most of the Mediterranean, coastline. I mean, sure, yeah, you got Greece and whatnot, Yugoslavia that's still maybe Axis controlled, but you don't need any more carriers. You don't need any more of the battleships, because they're only doing so many coastal bombardments. Certainly, Paul. Glad. I hope people can learn, and I hope I learn too from good contributions in chat. So, the British Navy wants to keep being relevant, wants to come into the Pacific. They ask for permission to come into the Pacific by because they are operating in the China, the CBI, the China, Burma, India theater. So they're operating down and around here, but they want to come out into the Pacific, for the glory of it, but also, hey, we've got all these weapons and ships, and we do want to end the war earlier. We do want to, of course, try to get places like, Singapore and Hong Kong back and have influence around the world. And there's strategic reasons, and as well as altruistic, like in ending the war earlier, getting their people out of prison and war camps and whatnot. And Nimitz sort of goes, no, we don't need you. Go away. I mean, almost literally like that. And I mean, not quite as rude. And so they appeal up to I don't know if it quite goes to FDR, but they appeal up pretty high, and Nimitz is forced to take British units. Well, the British, not only do they have, and now you got to realize Commonwealth forces, Australian and some British, have been operating down, along MacArthur's push through here. But they want to get out into with the big boys out here. They have to learn and they just don't operate at sea long enough, because the distance from where they have to resupply at port to then get there, about half for their time, I forget how many days, but about half the time is just in transit. And then to operate here, then they have to start heading back. So they've got to learn how to resupply at sea. And by the end of the war, they're starting to get that down to do it as well. But Britain is not sort of universally trained for at-sea resupply and set up for it. And so they're having to use, American, tankers that are coming alongside and bringing supplies, fuel over. The British are, need resupply, because they're resupplying gun ammo and other things like that. They're doing a lot of supply to keep them going, and it's difficult. And so Americans can do it. Can't do it like in the middle of a hurricane or a major storm, no. But and the Pacific is a lot a lot more calm than the Atlantic. That's why it's called the Pacific, the peaceful ocean. And so keeping that operation, America really takes over from Britain. And it's not just the collapse of the British Empire or the collapse of Britain because of the war that makes them the lesser naval power. It is really America and the Pacific War that just, between technology, between training levels, between skill level, not just levels of training, and by that I mean train all of the sailors how to do all these different functions like resupply, but also the skill levels of their command elements. And I don't mean just their admirals, but also mean their captains, but also their petty officers through their fleet is just really getting to be world class. And it's beyond what Japan can do. Japan has multiple problems. One is educational levels. A lot of their sailors are not very well educated, so you hand them a manual on something and they'll stare at it, because not that they can't read basic Japanese writing necessarily, but they're not like high school educated. A lot of the sailors, they're sort of elementary or basic. I'm not saying they can't read and write. I don't know the literacy level, but it ain't as high as America. There's a lot of them that don't read and write, I do believe, although they're trying to get literacy up, and they value literacy, being able to read and write. But a lot of the sailors are just sort of elementary school kind of educated. So some of these manuals get a little over their head. and they don't have the even before the war starts off, they don't have the fuel, the ammunition, the other supply, the wear and tear on ships to go out and spend a lot of time training, to just train up the sailors, and they're dedicated. But and there's the Japanese vessels are, if you really look at them and look in detail, they don't have the crew comforts, and they're, you look at a picture of like the Taiho, which was late, or actually coming into the war, late war, but it's sort of a mid-war designed and produced carrier, and it's the most advanced Japanese carrier there is. It gets sunk because of bad training, trying to either not using it right or not using it, they believe, the fire suppression system and the venting, that instead of trying to cut off the fire, they open it up so the fire spreads and sinks the ship. Not that it wouldn't have been doomed anyways, but it would have probably survived whatever the attack was that killed it, if had they used, and it had some very advanced, supposedly, fire suppression systems, piping to run fire hoses and whatnot around the ship to fight fires. So it's a very advanced ship. But if you can look at that ship, or you can look at a bunch of the other main fleet carriers, and you'll see, like around the conning tower, a bunch of if it's like a properly colorized photo, a bunch of white bundles all around those the conning tower. Those white bundles are the bedding for the sailors. So every morning, wherever, because like in the aircraft hangars or in other places around the ship that are spaces that are have other uses, they sling hammocks in there. The U.S. has given up basically use of hammocks by this point. They sling hammocks up there and sleep there, so they can't use the space for anything else. So in the morning, the sailor has to get up and bundle up his hammock and his bedding tightly and put it and then they get bundled together, and then they get mounted on the outside of the ship. Well, this to me is a 18th century British and French naval practices, because they actually would do the same thing and actually sort of create a somewhat missile-proof, like musket ball type proof barriers are on the British ships with these things above the railing and whatnot, as sort of a protective thing. So if you're in battle, your bedding is getting messed up. Well, the Japanese are doing this, where the Americans, you look at, the ships are crammed full of people, because when they bring back the Iowa-class battleships during the Reagan era and during Vietnam, the manning levels are much, much lower, meaning how many sailors on board the ship is much, much lower than it was during World War II, heavily because of all of the manually operated, even if there's radar or other ballistic computers that are still sort of targeting them, there's still, all the anti-aircraft guns. All of that stuff is all, there's just so much manpower that is gone by the time you get to the 80s, because the guns are either gone or just not being used. So they're mostly, by the 80s, I believe, just using dedicated berthing spaces. Where if you look at because I've been watching some videos, and I know I should be playing some videos on the battleship, I think it's New Jersey, that making there, and they're showing some old photos. So like during World War II, the mess areas for the common sailors would at night be converted over, at least some parts of it, be converted over to being sleeping, and maybe they're putting hammocks in there, but I don't think so. But they had bunks that would fold down and things like that. Well, the Japanese just don't have a lot of these spaces. So it's not that it's horrible to be on a Japanese ship. I'm not saying it's that way. But it's tiring. It's wearing out. And if you do that for too many days, you become less productive. You become less sharp in the mind. It's wearing out. So the Japanese, can't train to the level that the Americans are. They just can't afford it, literally, before the war starts. And after the war starts, it's even worse because they're having to focus more and more on the necessary elements of the war. So Japanese sailorship degrades as the war goes along, partially because they're losing a lot of their core elements because they're being sunk, and the officers, the NCOs, the trained professionals are going down with the ship. So it's partially that same thing that's happening with their pilots and their flight carrier crew deck ground crews. I mean, they're not ground there. They could be working on the ground, but on board ship, all these people are being lost. So the quality is going down. Britain is sort of hanging on, but not quite to the level of the Americans. Germany is very professional, but very, very small navy. France, well, I don't think it was terribly good to begin with, but it's wrecked by the war. Italy's, they're not terribly great, but they're the best of any Italian branch. But so it's really America comes away with the best navy. Some British ships could not replenish at sea because they were not outfitted for it. Absolutely. That being said, they represented themselves well at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Yep. Hello, Speed Games. How you doing? Have you ever thought of playing any alt history mods? Well, I have played the a couple of times, and welcome here, Speed Games. The Kaiserreich mod for Hoi 4. So I have played that. I either like well done, the whole sort of world properly alt history, like Kaiser. Now I call it the wild and wacky world of Kaiserreich because that's sort of how I would describe it. But I guess you can move to here. So yeah, I have, but not a lot. So it really has, for me, it has to be something done intelligently in the alt history space, and not just sort of kind of like, oh, Kaiser back in Germany or something simplistic like that. Okay, we lost 2 destroyers out here that were sort of sub-hunting off of the Atlantic coast. Okay, expand. Oh, pause. Expand our factory so we get another artillery factory in Charleston. Tungsten surplus. Nice. We lose it because we were trading off some of it. Foreign ministry. Okay, some intelligence and other bonuses. Okay, Western share approaches, and we have more because of our advanced education. Well, let's do Marine HQs. And yes, okay. Oh, Michael Fox, been a while since we've chatted, I believe. How effective would you say the Japanese subs are in any World War II game you've played as the AI compared to how they really performed? Well, I would say on the whole, the AI does better than Japan did historically. I would say that. Japan. A lot of the naval officer class are descended from samurais. I think that's similar in the army. Now, a lot of the samurais that they're descended from are, at best would be sort of middle level management in Japanese society that at the time that they switched over. But honor is a very big thing. And that's part of it. Also, Japan absorbs Alfred Thayer Mahan's book, um, uh, the influence of sea power upon history, often just shortened to influence. So does, of course, the United States Navy, but they take different lessons from the book. Japan wants to use its submarines as a screening force and initial engagement force for fleet actions because they believe, well, because they know that they're at a disadvantage with the Western powers when it comes to naval operations, particularly in most Japanese ships going to sea to war do not have a full magazine capacity or full magazines of ammunition because they just don't have enough ammunition. They don't have enough ammunition to train properly. They just don't have enough ammunition. So they don't fully fill their magazines for their ships. And although they do very well, particularly in the early years of the war, and we were talking last week about Abdicom down here, and Japan doing rather well in some of these battles, they're on a very slim margin. So they very much feel that the need to, and they're, even though by the end of the war they're starting to get radar in on some ships, but the radar is still very primitive. Where by the end of the war, most fleet submarines in the American service have radar on the submarines, both air search and surface search radar. Japan doesn't have radar or it's very poor radar. So their navy is not set up to be a radar influenced navy. They don't rely upon it. It's sort of like a nice extra to have. Sure, it would be great, but it's not something in their doctrine that they're relying upon. So they need the submarines along with aircraft to try to find the enemy surface vessels, and then they want to attrit the enemy fleet by sinking, and they know going after battleships because the battleship blisters put on the side of the ships and other things. They're probably not going to sink the battleship necessarily. They get enough good hits certainly, but you're normally maybe just slow it down a bit. But if you slow down one or two battleships because whether they have to their submarine blister gets popped, so that floods. You have to flood the other side to keep the ship from capsizing, to keep it even. Or if it goes into some of the more useful spaces of the ship, and they're able contain the flooding in there by closing watertight compartments. So either that ship has to turn around and head back to port, or all the other ships has to slow down to the speed of the slower ship because you want to keep formation. So they want to use it to attrit the fleets before the big fleet action. They want to use it for honorable purposes of going after warships and not just going after transports. So they don't effectively use submarines like the Germans and the Americans and the British use submarines very effectively in anti-shipping operations. The Italians somewhat effectively. So I would put the AIs, which generally will go after commerce rating, as an effective way to do it. So I would say the AIs use it better. Let's see, what is speed gaming? That's my issue with reading a lot of alt history. It doesn't go into detail about how the events change. Oh yeah, I could, and I don't know if you've watched. Sometimes I'll go in and explain an alt history scenario. You know how whatever could happen, and you've got to know history well to start changing it and making it make sense. You really have to know it well. Doesn't go into detail. I've tried myself writing alt history, but run into a problem where I go into every little detail. Yeah, well, okay. What you have to do is write two things when you write. I have not done any writing. I talk or think. Once you put the extra burden of writing, whether typing or writing with pen and paper. I spend too much mental energy on things like spelling that I slow down my train of thought so it doesn't work well. So I should probably try to do some speech to text type stuff, then I could maybe do okay. But I really quite it really gets things don't go well. I'm not saying they would go great otherwise, but however good they would have been that I can spin a story speaking or think it in my head, once I start to put the process of putting it on the paper or whatever, it really doesn't come out well. It gets a lot of well, okay, we'll get to naval. Okay, not necessarily World War I mentality, but you need to write two things. And this I've sort of learned from reading a little about David Weber. He is a science fiction author. And he also, if you've heard him speak, he knows World War II Navy stuff. Oh, so much better than I do. And particularly the Pacific War. And you hear him, and I can just, because I see him sitting there, talking about this stuff, rattling off facts and figures of the stuff so much better than you're hearing me do this, just off the top of his head. He knows it. He knows it well. He is an expert on the stuff, I would say. And from his writing style is whenever because he writes science fiction set, like in the future. Whenever he introduces a character, he stops and in another document says something about that character. Like describes him in some way. Not necessarily always physically, but starts describing to him. And then as he continues with that character and it attributes more things to it, he's constantly updating this other document. So the biography of that character or technologies of the science fiction world or whatever that he's working in, or the descriptions of the worlds that he's working in, he's constantly updating this secondary document that isn't for publication, because sort of like describing what Speed Games is describing. I hope everybody on YouTube out there is hitting the like button to boost the live stream. Is because if you put on all of these details, it slows up the story. So what you need to do is create a document or book or whatever, whether it's ever published or not, I don't know, but that has all the alt history. You go through and you need to create the alt history world, where it changes, how it changes, what it changes, even things that may never get referenced in any sort of work of fiction, but build that world. So build an alternative history world, and then write your story, and making sure that the reader is experiencing the different alt history and coming onto it and understanding, and only giving them maybe side details, but enough to explain so things don't seem entirely out of place, but just explain just sort of enough to keep that story flowing. So have one that has all of your alt history details in it, that is, embellished and cool and all that stuff, but it would read like an encyclopedia or dry history book. The other one is your storytelling that does it. That's how you need to do alt history. You need to have the two documents, two books, two whatever that you're working on simultaneously. because as you work through it, you've got to, you don't want to lose details that you thought of 6 months ago or whatever, or contradict yourself in different places, that kind of thing. So you can always refer to it, and then of course try to have a friend or two that would be willing to read both documents to see if they both work together and make sure that that there aren't conflicts. And if there are conflicts, which one you want the story, before you publish, which you want the story. Does the story take precedence? So you change and if it makes sense to change your Bible, if you will, of the world, or do you use the Bible and go, no, that has to be changed in the story because it's referenced here and here and here, else in the story, so to keep it all flowing. So that's how you have to do it if you're going to do it. Okay, World War I naval mentality. No, I wouldn't say that, because we can see, particularly Germany using submarines as commerce raiders. Britain is very, very experienced with the idea of commerce raiders, though before World War I are expecting them to be primarily surface ships, often disguised, or very light and very fast surface ships, that would run away from heavier ships, but be able to catch merchant marines. It's more... Okay. And I've read a bunch on this back when I was doing my Japanese series. And we'll sort of wind up at this point and then start another episode. Japan knows it can't invade and defeat America. It knows that. Knows it at every level of society. But it also knows that it can't invade and defeat Russia. And whether you call it the Soviet Union, you call it Russia, I'm talking about this political, cultural group. It knows it can't defeat it. But it did defeat it here in the Straits of Tsushima in naval operations, and in what in essence is Russia's colonial empire, especially back in 1904 or whatnot, during the Russo-Japanese War. It's able to defeat forces out here. It takes Port Arthur. It's able to win out here on the extremities, but it knows it's not going to be able to march an army in and take Moscow. It has no conceivable thought. Even in World War II, pushing past something like Lake Baikal here is just off the table in reality. However much we might be able to do it in, maybe a little bit further or something. Now, if Germany's taken Moscow and Germany's, pushing deep, sure, the Soviet Union's collapsing and you're just sort of occupying territories, yes. But we're talking about military being able to push in against the foe that's capable of fighting. It knows it can't. So, combination of reading Alfred Thayer Mahan book Influence and its experience, Japan believes that if it can trigger a war, primarily with the U.S., but it also, whether it's France or Britain as well. Britain, up until its war with China, had been Japan's primary ally, but it's realizing that it's writing off, and it's primarily naval ally, it's writing off its ally, Britain, but it's sort of by that point okay because it's busy with a war in Europe and it can't do much anyways. Japan believes that if it can destroy the U.S. fleet and take a bunch of territories, that then, because this is what happens in the previous war, it can negotiate a settlement with the Americans. Whatever that settlement may be. It may be like retreating out of the Philippines. It may be giving back Guam. But it would be something that would say, if we win, we get to keep, Dutch East Indies for exploitation. Oil primarily, but other things. Maybe force the U.S. to either sell oil or sell steel or some sort of commercial agreement like that. It believes it can do so. Now, there's two problems with this. One is particular to what happens in World War II, and the other is just a general problem. What happens in World War II is the particular problem is it loses the war day one when it attacks Pearl Harbor because of the surprise element of the attack. It enrages America. Because I've known the World War II generation. They were my grandparents. I mean, both of my granddads did not fight in the war. Different reasons. I know I've explained them other times. Not going to go into them. Now, one of my granddad's brothers, who I didn't know, did fight and was a Marine in the war. But they were of the generation to be at war. It was one granddad had already been injured before the war. The other granddad was, I guess I'm explaining here. The other granddad was a bit older, had a family, had a small butcher shop that he owned. And so that was sort of, if he went into the army pay was too little to support his family, so his family wouldn't have money. And his butcher shop, which is a needed a sort of a protected class. He didn't want to go into the war particularly, but it would have torn his family apart, and there wasn't immediate relatives to dump his family on. And he had two kids by the start of World War II. One of them being my father. So he does. My father is is like 4 or 5 years old by the end of the war. So he has vague memories as a child in America, but. So running a necessary, a sort of protected business, if you will, that's, feeding the nation, being a butcher shop, so he's not drafted. And the other one had already had a physical injury before the war broke out that would make him 4F or unable to serve in the military, but he would have. Okay, Sun Temple Radio, thanks for being here. See you next time. So, but knowing these people, they're enraged at Japan, not like Nazis in Germany, but Japan, because of the way the attack on Pearl Harbor happens. The other thing, so that's enraged. I mean, now had they declared, and had it been for a day or two, but even just one day on the headlines across America, Japan declares war against America, and then the attack happens in Pearl Harbor, that would have been a different animal. But that's not what happened. That's why Yamamoto, who already knows that war is not going to go well for Japan, and there's a very slim chance of being able to get a negotiated settlement, realizes what happens, because you got to understand, Yamamoto has traveled back and forth across America, studied at an American university, so he's met a bunch of Americans, is a very good poker player, known to be a good poker player, but seen Detroit, seen the oil fields of Texas, so he's been all over America, not just stopped at a couple of places. He spent like a year or more in the United States, so he knows America. He knows that these people will be enraged by what happens at Pearl Harbor. But it's already too late. The other factor that Japan never factors in, this is America. For all intents and purposes in 1940s. This is America. They can't touch America. Literally cannot touch America. Oh, you got the I-400 class submarines that they make 2 or 3 of. I think there's just 2 of them, because there's one that's shorter that just has 2 airplanes or whatever. The big I-400s, they can go global. They have the ability to carry food and fuel to go global. And they can fly out here. They can launch, if there's 2 of them, they can launch 6 aircraft and go bomb something. And, maybe aircraft could escape back out to sea, get back on the subs, and the subs could go somewhere else and drop 6 more bombs, because the aircraft aren't very big. They're basically 1 bomb per aircraft. The one mission that they were really sort of getting ready for was to try to destroy one of the locks at Panama Canal will shut the Panama Canal down. And that would have been, especially if that had been done in 1941, that would have been very, very useful for Japan at that point. But in 1945, when they're getting ready to go do it, no, that's too late. Even if the operation was a success, it's too late to materially change the outcome of the war. But this is America. This is where America's shipbuilding is happening at. Lots of America's aircraft industry. Now, yes, the aircraft industry is pretty heavy out here. And yes, Kaiser does, as the war gets going, build a bunch of shipbuilding factories out here and a bunch of other things out here. But they can't touch America. And America isn't Russia. My understanding is a lot of those ships that were sunk in the Straits of Tsushima that were Russian were actually built by Germany. The Russians do not have a massive industry ever. They're getting there by World War II, but they don't have a massive naval building supremacy. So that the population and the manufacturing can spam out fleets. Not spam out vessels, spam out fleets. And so even if you have the big, even if like you declare war, we declare war on you, and then the next day outsails the Japanese fleet out here, and the American fleet, which is old and tired for the battleships and just a few carriers, that the Japanese maybe have a better fleet at that moment. Not what's being built, not what's coming in a year. They've already sort of started a lot of production, but what's sort of being built here. And that's also part of the timing is Japan realizes that America is upping its naval forces, and because it's all public information. So that it's going to be harder to defeat in late 1942. So it's sort of a window, and this is sort of part of people's problems that we have with China literally right now as I'm making this video, and whatever that fucking supposedly meeting that Xi and Biden have, and I think Xi is assessed that Biden is a non-entity, but still there are people behind him in the White House, but he may see it as his window that America may be at its weakest, though they do know the schedule of decommissioning U.S. vessels that will be at our weakest in 2027 before we start to build back up. Though I think they're maybe rethinking decommissioning some of these vessels early. Problems, but by 2030 or more, America is going to be much more navally armed up than it is now. So China may be not looking at some people are saying it's not whether China today thinks it's going to win now or not. It's looking at its window of possible winning, and this may be the biggest window it sees now. But I don't know. I don't think it's ready to invade. I'm not going to go into details here on that, but it's sort of some of this window element that Japan is facing. But even if they got the sort of, we're at war, and we're going to fight the U.S. Navy, and somewhere out in here there's going to be a big naval battle, and if Japan can win, they'll then open negotiations, or if Japan loses, they'll open negotiations for surrender, because all their fleets will be sunk, and it'll just be a matter of time. But even if that were to happen, America goes, huh? Oh, you mean our colony, in essence, in Hawaii is now in danger? Oh, you've taken our colony in Hawaii. Okay, that sort of pisses off a bit. Oh, your aircraft are striking at Douglas aircraft or whatever out here in LA area. Oh, this is troubling. Yeah. 2 years later, in comes this huge American fleet or fleets raging at them, and right behind them are more fleets being built, and so the strategic ability for Japan to fight America, it just isn't there. Now, when Japan sets up its alliance before 1900 with Britain, and it's partially why they fight Russia, because Britain is trying to contain Russia. Go back to the Crimean War. You can go back even to the Napoleonic Wars, when Russia sort of kind of says it inherits Malta, but Britain says nope, 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 nope. Britain sort of stands off some Russian trying to take over this island right here. They had a cousin living there for a few years. That had been a Venetian colony, stands off the Russians there. Britain does not want Russia into the Mediterranean. Britain will even support the Turks against the Russians, with Russians pushing out there. So that's why there's a Japan-Russian alliance that's somewhat against Germany, but also against Russia's expansion. I think Japan has now found its long-term natural alliance today now, in that it's America. Japan is like Britain, and I don't know if, I believe Michael Fox is British. I believe so, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, or presumably I believe English, but yeah. Britain's, and I know there's a big controversy still over Brexit, and some people I know are still upset about Brexit that are good Britons. But Britons and Europeans are different people. They're a different strain. Britons, and I wish I saved the infographic. It was de Gaulle talking about Britons and how they're not Europeans, how they're a maritime people, not a continental people. And some of the various other cultural differences going on between Britain and that. Yep, you are right. So, and I understand that there's maybe good reasons and there's bad reasons. I fall in, because I have lived in Britain, actually lived in Scotland, but visited Britain a lot. So, and my ancestry is, as far as I know, is all more or less from, I don't know if there's any Irish, but from, Scotland through England and whatnot is all my ancestries. And my last ancestor comes over around 1900, initially to Canada and then down into the United States. So British history until 1900 is also my history. And though I did have some ancestors that were in the colonies before independence, so also American history is my history too. But the Britain is different than Europe. And it's a gradation. Obviously they're British are more similar to Dutch and French than Turks are to Dutch and French. Obviously. So we're talking gradients here. But I say Britons are different than most of the Europeans. They're definitely different than the Latins, the French, the Italians, the Spanish, Portuguese. They're definitely different than that. They have those influences. They're different than the Germans that I met and know throughout my life. So they're not quite Germans. They're not quite Scandinavians. They're not quite, these are sort of Latins, sort of others. They're not these other peoples that make these several big ethno groups up here that I've sort of quickly ran down here. In Europe, they're different from all of those. They're similar but different. Well, that's the same, I would say, with Japan. Combination of isolation, defeating 2 attempts at Mongol invasions, where all of the rest of basically civilized. I don't know at the time, maybe because the Mongols sort of kind of control, I think, Vietnam. I don't know, but there are some sort of civilized empires maybe during that down here in Cambodia, Thailand, but much of civilized Asia, the Mongols conquer, except for Japan. Japan is able to stave that off. So they're different than the Chinese and the Koreans and the Vietnamese and the whatevers. They're different. They don't want to be dominated by the continent. Okay. So because of their lateness to modernity, they try to develop an empire, Korea, Taiwan. Never really goes terribly well. Britain, of course, does develop an empire. America has sort of an empire. We could talk about it. I would classify it as an empire in a way, and in a way not, in that it's mostly Anglo and whatnot. And it's as opposed to, when, Gauls are, because they're Celts, they're not, at the time, they're not Latins. So Rome is ruling over Celts here, not Latins. Rome is ruling over Greeks, not Latins in Greece, and similarly, in other parts of the world. So it's not just Greater Italy as it would sort of become the Latin peoples. So America is sort of imperial, sort of not, within America. And Britain has its empire. Now it doesn't, but did in this time period. So Britain and Japan need help with continental empires and not being swallowed up by them. So I think Japan now has developed its natural ally in America. That it's sort of, because Yamamoto liked America. Captain Hara, the guy who writes Japanese Destroyer Captain, the book, very good book, also liked America. He bought a watch when it was like in New York City when he or whatever was visiting as a cadet in one of the cadet ships that sailed and visited a few ports around the world. He visited America. He liked Americans. They didn't hate America. It was more seeing it as a strategic rival. And someday, somehow, and this is even before the Japanese army expansion into China, saw that, well, who are we most likely and most worried about fighting? Well, we've defeated the Russians, and then they get defeated in World War I. So then the Soviets, and the Soviets are all fucked up. They don't have much of a navy, so we're not worrying about fighting a big Soviet fleet. This is the Japanese Navy. Well, we've had an alliance with Britain, and that's getting fucked up as the army is, pissing off the Europeans. France is a problem, but they're as much worried about strategic of Italy and other powers. So yeah, it's America looks to be like the big danger to them, to their whatever. So you plan for the worst case scenario. Who are you worst? What's the one nation you're most likely to fight that's the worst possible fight, and you prepare for that, and then if you end up fighting France or somebody, you're in a better position than you planned for. Well, Japan, I think, has now come to the realization that it's pissed off its neighbors, Korea, even Taiwan, even the Philippines, in its behavior in World War II, and it's kind of doing the Asian thing of trying to deny, because of face and other things, deny that they did things wrong, deny anything that went wrong in World War II. And so they're not really apologizing well, if at all, for their bad behavior in World War II, while trying to still diplomatically patch things over with these people. So it's not going terribly well, but it's not going terribly bad either. So it's finding that, yeah, America is where they need to find that alliance to think that the U.S. probably isn't going to swallow them up as a territory. Yeah, we have Guam as literally our territory, and the Guamanians, they love us. They don't want independence. They look around and they go, yeah, we like being America. We have American Samoa out here somewhere. I think it's these little islands here, or some of the islands. Oh no, it's over here. This is, yeah, or somewhere out here we have American Samoa. Samoa is actually larger than American Samoa. We just, maybe it's here. Yeah, this is Samoa. Yeah, this is American Samoa. We have American Samoa, just a few smaller islands. The main bigger islands are pseudo-independent. And, I don't know if today more of a colony of Australia or America or whatever, and we sort of have our protectorates out in these various island nations out here that are literally American puppets. But most of the people that live under direct American jurisdiction like it. The Filipinos, hey, they've reelected a Marcos. Marcos' son is now president, and then in a supposedly reasonably honest and reasonably fair election, they reelected a Marcos because they're moving back into the American sphere of influence. Instead of trying to either play off America versus China or move in the Chinese sphere, they're realizing it's sort of the American sphere. So, but America's probably not going to turn Japan into a new colony or anything like that anytime practical in the future, and they face more danger from other threats, whatever they may be. So yeah, I think Japan has found its way and knows that it's not going to it's not in its long-term national interest to be a, you know, conquering imperial power. It's more, hey, let's intervene along with whoever, you know, South Korea to fight North Korea or whoever it might be an ally to these people. And then once you're an ally with these people, wherever, you'll be able to buy resources off them. And let's see what Michael Fox is. But also Japan felt they were superior to their opponents and felt America was soft. They had already defeated Russia in 1905, I believe, at Tsushima. I would... Okay, the Army may have had that opinion of America. May. But from reading... from my readings, the Navy did not. Yamamoto did not think America was soft. Yamamoto knew that behind every blade of grass in America was a rifle ready to point out at his people. He knew America was not soft. And although Japan is very ageist, means that you're sort of anti-age. Sort of seniority of age is very important in Japan still to this day. So Yamamoto, being a young admiral, was not in charge, but he had heavy influence within the Navy High Command, above and beyond his, you know, current level of rank and actual duty status. But he wasn't in charge. But heavy influence. And he had, like I say, traveled and heavy influence. The Navy knew that the American Navy was a force to be reckoned with. Now the Army, who was actually running the foreign policy, and eventually by 41, it's only in 41 does Tojo actually move from being the head of the Kempeitai, the secret police, the Army secret police, or the Army police, or whatever you want to call it, in Manchuria, to actually being prime minister. It's only in 41, early 41, does he move over to being head of the Japanese government. It ends up, I think, with 3 positions in the cabinet, so he's really personally controlling. He's really controlling the cabinet, and it's only in 41, and that may very well be an Army position, but that's not the Navy. And the Army, I think, is ignorant of America. And damn right, we are an identity unto ourselves. There's the channel between us and the continent. Yeah, and you know, and there's a different identity there, and however good. And so, yeah, so that's sort of the thing. And I think we're going to end the episode here, not the live stream, but the episode here. So I want to thank everyone for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. And we'll see you next time for more ramblings and hopefully actually some playing of Hearts of Iron.